Did you know that if you get pulled over, you can end up landing yourself a DUI even if you haven't been drinking? DUIs are so common that police officers are routinely asking specific types of trick questions to find out if you're under the influence. So what I'm going to do today is share with you how to spot these trick questions and also how to answer them so that you do not get a DUI if you're ever pulled over next time. So I am criminal defense attorney Hannah Akintoye, and what I would like to share with you is how to spot these trick questions that police officers are trained to ask you during every traffic stop, whether you've been drinking or not. These are trick questions that are so subtle that they're easy to miss. And these types of trick questions are called divided attention questions. So what's a divided attention question? A divided attention question is simply just that, a question that divides your attention in two separate directions. Now, there are two types of divided attention questions that police officers will routinely ask in these traffic stops. First are the compound questions. So asking two questions to you at once. For instance, a police officer may ask you what your first name and your middle name is, and then they'll say, "Oh, and can you also tell me what your date of birth is?" Right? And so most of the time, what people do, and this is how they always miss this, is they'll either answer the first question or they'll answer the second question. They don't answer both questions. Now, in the scenario that I gave you where the officer asked for your first and your middle name, sometimes what people will do is they won't pay attention and they'll answer the wrong question. And so you're used to the officer asking for your first and your last name. You weren't paying attention to find out if the officer was actually asking for your first and your middle name. So sometimes what people will do is they'll answer their first and their last name because that's what they would expect, instead of asking for clarification. Now, you can ask for clarification, but that simply just shows that you're paying attention to the question. You also acknowledge that question is rather unusual, that for the most part, a police officer really typically asks for your first and your last name. So understanding how to answer compound questions is really important. You want to make sure that you're answering both questions because that is really what police officers are looking for. They don't really care what your first and your middle name is because they're already going to be asking for your ID, so they'll see it anyway. They don't really care what your date of birth is because that should be on your paperwork or your ID as well, but they really are paying attention for your answer. All right, so that's the first type of divided attention question, compound questions. Now, the second type of divided attention question is a little bit more complicated, and it is a question that requires a mental response at the same time that it requires a physical response. So let me give you another example of this. The police officer may ask you for your date of birth and say, "Oh, by the way, let me have your date of birth, and oh, by the way, can you also grab your registration?" So in that particular situation, you have to verbally respond with what your date of birth is. At the same time, you'll also want to grab and reach for your registration. Most people will just say, "Oh, maybe he didn't need my date of birth. Maybe he really just needed my registration." So you grab your registration and you provide it to the officer, but you never say your date of birth. Or the other way around could also apply. Maybe you say your date of birth and then you don't provide your registration. What could be worse out of this whole entire situation is that you don't do either, right? Instead, you provide the officer with your license instead of your registration. Things like that could indicate that you are impaired. So really, really paying attention to the question that the police officer is asking, answering all the questions at the same time, or asking for clarification because you understand that it's an unusual question, really shows that that person may not be impaired. And these are questions that are routinely asked in traffic stops. You're not even going to notice that they are divided attention questions trying to find out if you are under the influence. They're simple routine questions, but they combine it, or they turn it around so that it kind of tricks you into maybe only answering one out of the two or three questions that the police officer poses to you. So next time you're pulled over, if you're pulled over, just remember that these divided attention questions are trick questions. You want to make sure that you answer them correctly so that you don't turn a 10-minute traffic stop into a 1-hour DUI investigation. So I hope that information is helpful to you. If you have any questions, always feel free to reach me directly below by commenting and asking me whatever questions that you have. You can also reach me by contacting me at my website, mydclaw.com, and I'm always happy to chat with you further. So as always, stay safe, and I'll see you all soon.